Canada's latest federal budget has been revealed. I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. The federal government has announced $56 billion in new spending that's going to be spread out over the next 6 years. Now, the overall strategy behind that amount of money is to do a couple things. First of all, they want to grow the economy, and second, they want to make life more affordable. On the affordability side of things, the much talked about dental program that the Liberal Party and the NDP worked together to create is part of this package. In fact, it actually represents $5.3 billion of the spending. There's going to be a national dental care program for lower income people. And the overall budget is about $56 billion. So this is getting close to roughly 10% of that, this one program. And I do think there is some merit to it. It will be interesting to see how things play out, but there are some facts that undergird the importance of dental care. It's not an optional procedure. It's not something like a Botox treatment. Having poor dental care can result in numerous problems down the road for someone. And some of these problems will be absorbed by our healthcare system and the hospitals. So perhaps an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of a cure here. That could very well be the case. And if this was approached from that angle, I'm honestly open to seeing how things play out. If you can't afford dental care, it's a travesty if you have to just do nothing. If you have to ignore your teeth and your gums. Now, the counter argument here is that, of course, it's very difficult to subsidize dental care for every Canadian. The cost would be astronomical. Now, what we're doing here is subsidizing low-income people because presumably those with a more stable income can either afford their yearly checkup or they're going to be at a job with an insurance plan that covers that. Now, this is a pretty loose net. There's bound to be people who fall through the cracks, especially because, as we all know, a middle-class lifestyle or salary isn't exactly what it was before. Many of those individuals might still not be able to afford dental care, but they don't meet the low-income threshold. And they also probably don't have jobs that offer comprehensive dental coverage. What do you do in that case? That's where this idea will really be tested. What do you do in that case? Can we afford to expand the parameters of the program without bankrupting the government purse? These are all things to consider, but I am open to seeing how things play out. Now, aside from the dental, the other 90% of the budget deals with things like housing, trying to attract investment, defense spending. So there's a plethora of things here, and I do want to summarize a couple of them. Starting with housing, the Liberal government plans to spend billions of dollars on new home construction. That's good. Now, the housing problem is driven by two factors, as which all problems are economically: supply and or demand. There's definitely a supply problem in many popular parts of Canada, whether it's Metro Vancouver or Toronto or the GTA more broadly. There just isn't enough housing to accommodate everyone's wants. So pouring money into programs to build housing, and not just single family dwellings. You have to actually build things like townhomes at the least, or in better cases, condos, low-rise apartment buildings, things like this, so we can fit in as much people as possible and give them a living space. Now, on the demand side, it's been artificially inflated because it's not only Canadians who are bidding for Canadian real estate. And thus, the federal government has made a very prudent decision to implement a 2-year ban on non-resident foreigners buying residential properties. Many of these foreign investors would speculate on Canadian real estate, and they would drive pricing up needlessly. If Canadians can't afford housing in their own country, we definitely shouldn't be having foreign speculators running up the price. It just makes no sense. So I'm on board with this. In fact, we actually might need more than just a 2-year ban to really cool down housing prices. Now, anyone who's familiar with business knows that there are many workarounds here. The government is trying to ban non-resident foreigners, but that's fine. Now, what if they're a savvy non-resident and they establish a shell corporation in Canada? Well, now you can actually buy the house and treat it as an asset under that Canadian shell corporation. It'll still be yours, but it'll be owned indirectly through that company that you've set up. So that's a very easy workaround there. This probably is more of a showy policy for people to think that the government's doing something, and it might actually filter out some of the more novice foreign speculators, but any serious non-Canadian investors will have an idea of how to circumvent this ban. The government has also done something that's interesting still on the demand side. They're actually instituting something that's going to increase demand, presumably. There's going to be a new tax-free first home savings account. That's what it's called. And I believe how this works is every year you can contribute up to $8,000 into the account. And it works such as a tax-free savings account insofar as you're not going to be taxed on any capital gains you accrue within that, but also like an RRSP, where your contributions are tax deductible. So that's quite good, actually. And I imagine if you're a young person who has maxed out their TFSA, this becomes the next best thing to put your money into instead of the RRSP. Because anything left over in that account that isn't used to buy a home then gets transferred to your RRSP anyways. And here you're doubling up. You're getting the tax-free benefit and the tax deductible. On one hand, this could be a very powerful tool for first-time home buyers to save up that down payment, but it also could have a detrimental effect when it comes to pricing, especially in hot areas. We have to see how things play out, but here I'm agnostic. It's an interesting idea. I'm just not sure how things will play out. If the overall goal is to get housing costs to be more affordable, it's questionable if this will actually achieve that. And finally, on housing, the Liberal government is imposing a tax on property flipping that will affect those who buy and sell homes within a year. Another good thing. Less short-term investment in rental properties and quick fixer-uppers is going to be great because it'll leave more of a supply there for people who actually need a place to live and raise a family in. Now, moving on to business considerations, Ottawa is going to issue a two-part tax on Canadian banks and life insurers. They projected this will bring in over $6 billion of revenue over the next 5 years. So, part of the budget includes this thing called the Canada Recovery Dividend, and it's a one-time 15% tax on banks and their taxable income for the 2021 tax year. And they're going to have to pay that over 5 years. Now, banks did record massive profits over the pandemic, and this is the government essentially saying, we want a cut of that. And they're saying it's going to be a one-time fee, but some business people are speculating that it might not be that. It might turn into a mechanism that whenever the government needs a little boost, they'll implement another quote-unquote one-time fee and make it less attractive for big businesses to actually come to Canada. Now, of course, this is only targeted at banks right now, and they're going to be increasing taxes a little bit across the board for, as we talked about, banks and life insurers, but this remains to be seen if it will impact any type of business sentiment at all. The government is also looking to offset some of the hardships that small businesses have faced, and they're going to be giving them a minor tax break as part of this budget. Now, looking at climate, Ottawa is looking at transitioning the economy to a low-carbon one. That's going to be our goal here. So, they're going to set up a $15 billion growth fund to lure domestic and international capital to come to Canada and produce green technology and to make our economy suited to that sustainable lifestyle point of view. They are also going to be setting aside roughly $4 billion to develop a critical mineral strategy for electric vehicle batteries. This is quite major, actually. There is a shortage when it comes to these minerals and elements. So Canada getting serious about making use of our natural resources to do things like create these batteries, which will in turn help the environment. If they do end up being used for things like electric vehicles, that's a win-win-win. Now, there are some people who are criticizing the Trudeau government for not doing more here, But we have to look at the facts. The budget is quite hefty already, especially when we're bringing something in like a national dental care plan. You have to start wondering, at what point do we tap out? At what point do certain priorities get shifted and moved around? There is an infinite number of things that we could name that would be great to include in this budget, but money is not infinite and there are consequences for spending too much. So I think this budget is okay at this point in time. Certainly there's more that can be done on all fronts. We didn't even talk about military and spending more there, given Russian aggression, but you can't have everything. You have to strategize and pick the most important things for now. And the government did mention that, of course, this budget isn't including everything that they promised, but they are saying that over the next few years, there'll be more budgets and we'll get to these things that we talked about while we were campaigning. Personally, the budget to me seems overall reasonable. There are a couple silly things I did find within it, but that's going to happen regardless of whichever government is in charge. There'll always be something strange that they've concocted. But overall, I don't have too many problems with the big priority items here. The dental care plan will be interesting. I'm not convinced that this will succeed indefinitely. Starting off with this pilot of low-income families, I think that will work. But what happens when we realize that, hey, it's not just them, actually, who needs help with dental care? A lot of Canadians, even those in the middle class, can't afford it. Can we afford to help everyone out who needs that help? That's where an interesting impasse, I think, will be reached. Then you look at housing. It's great that they're doing stuff here. Perhaps they could have gone further. As we talked about, something like that 2-year ban. To me, it doesn't seem like it was thought about too deeply. And I know there are professionals in the budget committee and people would have raised this. Why don't we produce rules that will take care of loopholes? Foreign investors who are serious will do as I talked about and set up shell corporations. Why is there no provision to stop that? Well, it's either you didn't think about it or you thought about it but didn't care. That's a problem. Now, given the massive amounts of spending that the government has undergone over the past couple years, I'm not surprised that they've done things like go after banks to try and get more revenue from them. I'm not surprised that they implemented this quote-unquote one-time fee to take that 15% of their bottom line over the next 5 years. If that's going to degrade investment, if that's going to degrade business sentiment, it could be a problem, but I'm not convinced that'll be the case. And that's kind of the theme here with many of these interesting ideas. And I'm not really tilting in one direction or the other for many of them. I'm interested to see how they play out. Now, something like military spending is quite interesting to me. Trudeau, I feel, is in favor of ramping this up a little bit, especially given the current climate. Canada's entire Arctic flank is exposed, and given Russia's aggression towards Ukraine, we're sharing a pseudo border with them too, towards the north. Now, of course, Trudeau has formed that pact with Jagmeet Singh, and he's in opposition to these things. And I have to remind everyone again, the NDP had a party proposal, and they voted on this, to disband the Canadian military. I believe they used the term abolish, actually. They wanted it gone. Now, of course, it was to no shock that when people found out about this, they were castigated. People dragged them through the coals because it was just the epitome of stupidity. And that vote failed. The party is supposedly no longer in favor of this, but to even have it tabled as a motion indicates where they stand. So I'm not surprised when Jagmeet Singh comes up and says the NATO 2% requirement of GDP spending on military is arbitrary. And he's using that to downplay the need to ramp up spending. Of course, it's arbitrary. It could have been 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 1.9, but is it arbitrary in a way that makes sense? And in this case, I do believe it does. The reason why it's not a flat rate is because there's many different countries in NATO with different economic situations. If we say $1 billion, that could be a massive portion of a country, hypothetically like Italy, while it's nothing to America. Having a percent ensures that there is a minimum that's being met and that each country is proportionally being burdened with this contribution that's going to strengthen everyone. 2% for you, 2% for me. It's going to scale with how big your economy is, and therefore, the stronger you are, the more you can contribute. Canada already has a history of underspending, and if we're to rely on our allies, that's not a reputation that I'd want. I want to contribute on par with those of other people who have signed this agreement. I believe recent events have been a loud wake-up call for many of those on the far left who, I've said before, were living in la-la land, who were honestly thinking that we didn't need things like the military anymore and that global conflict was a thing of the past. That's simply a symbol of the bubble that they live in, and I do fear that Jack Meat still is in that bubble to some degree. But overall, a budget that I think is going to do a lot of good for Canadians, and I'm interested to see how things play out. Now, with that, it does bring us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the material, be sure to leave a review and share. They'll help us grow. And you can find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.